Picture this. You're walking the cold stone corridors of a medieval monastery. The only sounds are the distant murmur of chanting, the scuff of sandals on stone, the sigh of the wind. It's a world of silence and spirit, seemingly removed from earthly concerns. But then you catch a scent. It's warm, earthy, and sweet, a comforting aroma that seems out of place. You follow it down a spiral staircase to a low-ceilinged cellar. Here, in the flickering torchlight, monks are stirring vast copper kettles. The air is thick with the smell of malt and the tang of fermentation. This is where they made their beer. For nearly 1,000 years, this scene played out in cloisters across Europe. This wasn't a side project. It was a central pillar of their existence. They perfected recipes, recorded measurements with scholarly precision, and built breweries on sacred ground. Why? Was it simply for survival, for profit, or was it something far more profound? A fusion of faith and practicality that changed the world. In the next 2 minutes, we'll uncover the hidden history of monastic brewing. We'll explore how a simple act of making beer became an act of devotion, a scientific pursuit, and a lifeline for a continent. This isn't just the story of a drink. It's the story of how faith, science, and necessity combined to change the world, one sacred barrel at a time. To understand the monks' mission, we have to step into their world, a world far removed from our own. Imagine a village in the Middle Ages. There are no water treatment plants, no pipes bringing clean water to your home. The local river is the town's lifeline, but it's also its sewer. It carries away waste, and in turn carries typhoid, dysentery, and cholera. Drinking a handful of water was a genuine gamble with your life. Now, imagine the alternative: beer. The process of brewing, boiling the water, fermenting the liquid, unwittingly killed the dangerous pathogens. People didn't understand germ theory, but they understood cause and effect. They knew that the small beer, a low-alcohol brew, didn't make them sick. So, beer became the safe daily beverage for everyone, from the smallest child to the king himself. It was consumed at every meal, a faintly alcoholic, slightly gruel-like porridge of nutrition. This beer was thick, cloudy, and packed with calories and vitamins from the grains. It was, quite literally, liquid bread. In a world of uncertainty, famine, and disease, it was a reliable source of sustenance and safety. And into this void stepped the most organized, literate, and self-sufficient institutions of the age, the monasteries. Life in a monastery was governed by the rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century. Its core principles were prayer, study, and labora, work. Idleness was considered the enemy of the soul. Monks were to be self-sufficient, earning their keep through the work of their own hands. They farmed, they baked, they gardened, they copied manuscripts, and, quite naturally, they brewed. Think of a monastery not just as a church, but as a self-contained village. Within its protective walls were bakeries, infirmaries, libraries, guest houses for travelers, and of course, the brewery. Brewing was the ultimate act of practical piety. The beer nourished the monks themselves, but it also fulfilled a sacred duty of hospitality. A weary pilgrim, a poor traveler, anyone seeking shelter could find a warm meal and a safe, healthy drink within the monastery's walls. And because monks were among the few who could read and write, they didn't just make beer, they studied it. They became the first great record keepers of the brewing art. A recipe wasn't just memorized, it was written down, refined, and passed on. A batch that turned out exceptionally well would have its process meticulously documented. This wasn't mere note-taking, it was the first step toward the science of brewing. For them, perfecting the brew was part of perfecting their God-given work. The monastic devotion to brewing was supercharged by another key aspect of their faith: fasting. During Lent and other holy periods, the rules were strict. Solid food was severely restricted, sometimes to just one meal a day. But the rules, often cleverly interpreted, allowed for the consumption of liquid sustenance. And so, a rich, hearty, calorie-dense beer became the cornerstone of the fasting monk's diet. This wasn't the light lager we might think of today. This was a potent, unfiltered, porridge-like ale. It provided the energy needed for long hours hours of prayer and manual labor, all while adhering to the letter of their fasting laws. Some monasteries, like the Pauliners in Munich, famously brewed an extra strong Lenten beer or Doppelbock that was so nourishing it was said to have been called liquid bread, a term that captures its essence perfectly. It was a loophole, yes, but a divinely inspired one that kept body and soul together. Beyond the fast, beer's practicality was a miracle of preservation. In an age without refrigeration, fermentation was a way to preserve the harvest's grains. It could be stored for months, providing vital nutrition through harsh winters. For the monks, a full cellar was as important as a full granary. It was the key to survival, a testament to their foresight and discipline. Within the silent, methodical walls of the monastery, brewing evolved from a rustic craft into an early form of science. The monks were, in effect, Europe's first dedicated research and development brewers. Their cellars were their laboratories. They experimented tirelessly. Different barley strains, various fermentation times, the subtle art of temperature control in cool, earthen-floored cellars. One of their most significant contributions was the adoption of hops. Early beers were flavored with a wild mixture of herbs called gruit, which could include anything from bog myrtle to yarrow. But monks, particularly in Germany and what is now the Czech Republic, began to champion the hop. They discovered that hops did more than just add a pleasant, balancing bitterness. They were a natural preservative. Hopped beer could travel. It could be traded. It could last. This was a revolutionary discovery. By meticulously documenting their results, the monks standardized and perfected recipes that would become the bedrock of entire beer styles. They weren't just making beer, they were engineering it for consistency, quality, and longevity. When you sip a beer from a brewery like Weihenstephan in Germany, founded in 1040 and still operating today, you are tasting a legacy of 1,000 years of patient monastic refinement. That first Trappist ale from Chimay, that's not just a beer, it's a living manuscript. But monastic brewing wasn't just an insular practice. It became an economic engine. The reputation of monastic beer grew. It was consistent, it was high quality, and people trusted it. Pilgrims began to seek out certain monasteries not just for their relics, but for their renowned ales. Monasteries sold their surplus to local villages and taverns. The income generated was immense, and it was almost entirely funneled back into charity. The profits from beer-built hospitals, funded schools, maintained roads and bridges, and supported the poor. The monastery brewery was a social enterprise. Centuries before the term was invented, every barrel sold meant more alms for the needy, more books for the library, more medicine for the infirm. This economic power sometimes created tension with secular brewers and local lords, who saw the monks as formidable competition, but it also raised the bar for quality everywhere. The monastic model proved that brewing could be both a sacred art and a force for profound civic good. They turned the humble act of selling beer into a virtuous cycle of charity and community support. The ghost of the monastic brewer is in every glass of beer we drink today. The entire culture of craft brewing, with its emphasis on tradition, quality ingredients, and artisanal process, is a direct descendant of the monastic tradition. Specific beer styles are their living legacy. The complex, fruity, and strong Belgian ales, the doubles, triples, and quadruples, are all monastic inventions. The German purity law, the Reinheitsgebot of 1516, which decreed beer could only be made from water, barley, and hops, was a secular echo of the monastic pursuit of purity and quality. Even the crisp, clean Pilsner owes a debt to the monastic adoption of hops and lagering techniques. The very idea that a brewery can be a place of quiet dedication where the process is as important as the product is a monastic idea. When a modern craft brewer talks about passion and craft, they are speaking the same language as those medieval monks, even if their beliefs are different. They are honoring that same patient, meticulous pursuit of perfection. This golden age could not last forever. The waves of political revolution, secularization, and industrialization that swept across Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries hit the monasteries hard. Napoleon's forces dissolved hundreds of religious houses, seizing their lands and shutting down their breweries. Wars and anti-clerical governments shuttered many more. For a time, it seemed this ancient flame flame might be snuffed out, but embers remained. A resilient few monastic breweries survived, and in the 20th century, a revival began. Today, the official authentic Trappist product label is a badge of honor, signifying a beer brewed within the walls of a monastery, under the supervision of the monks, with profits directed to the community and charitable works. There are only a handful of these breweries left in the world, like West Vleteren in Belgium or St. Joseph's Abbey in Massachusetts. Their beers are sought after with a near-religious fervor, not just for their incredible flavor, but for what they represent: a living, breathing, bubbling connection to a deeper history. So, why did they do it? Why did monks brew beer for centuries? The simple answer is true: for survival, for sustenance, for charity. But the deeper answer is far more beautiful. They believe that work itself is a form of prayer, that to craft something with care and intention is an act of devotion. In their hands, the brewery was as holy a space as the chapel. The transformation of simple grain into life-giving beer was a kind of alchemy, a mirror of the spiritual transformation they sought in their own lives. In every barrel, they combined the earthly and the divine, the tangible grain and the mysterious, invisible force of yeast. It was a sacrament of practicality. It sustained them through hunger, funded their compassion, and offered a moment of grace and comfort to a traveler in a dark and dangerous world. Today, when we lift a glass of a carefully crafted beer, we are participating in that ancient tradition. We are tasting history. In the foam and the malt, you can, if you listen closely, still hear the echoes of chanting voices, the scrape of a copper paddle in a kettle, and the patient, faithful work of hands that believed making a good beer was, in its own way, God's work. If you enjoyed this journey into the cellars of history, consider subscribing for more stories that find the profound in the everyday. The story of beer doesn't end here, and neither does our exploration of the world's forgotten connections. Thanks for listening.